Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're in the stream. Today, how are young people changing the conversation on US gun reform? The student-led Never Again movement is demanding major changes to gun laws following an attack on the Marjorie Douglas Stoneman High School in Parkland, Florida. 17 people were killed when a former student opened fire with an assault rifle, and that was 2 weeks ago.
I'm Malika Bilal. Within days of that assault, the Parkland students marched to the state capitol, Tallahassee, and urged major reform on television and social media. Now they're planning to lead a rally in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. that's expected to draw hundreds of thousands of people. They've also inspired students from across the country to walk out of school in support of the Never Again movement. Have a look.
To be just another name in the list of tragedies that have happened because of the American gun control. We need change. We need something to happen. We don't want to be next. No other school wants to be next, but we need something. We need to do something. They're not going to give us that change if we don't fight for it.
I am afraid that I will be the next shooting, and I am afraid that my family will have to hear the news that I didn't make it.
We want change! We want change! We want change!
School shootings in the US have become a sad fact of life, and for many students, active shooter drills are a regular occurrence. So far this year, there have been at least 18 incidents where a gun was either fired on or near a school campus, according to figures compiled by the Everytown for Guns Safety Group. Over the last 5 years, there have been almost 300 incidents where a gun has been fired at or near a US school, shattering any sense of security among students, teachers and parents.
So can students have an impact on these statistics? Well, with us on set is Clifton Kinney, a 21-year-old student at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He's a political activist originally from St. Louis, Missouri. Joining us from Chicago is Charlene Carruthers. She is National Director of the Black Youth Project 100. That's a member-based organization of 18 to 35-year-old activists and organizers.
Kai Korber is a student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And also from Parkland, we have Olivia Feller. She is a student in her junior year at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. It's good to have you with us, everybody. I wish it was under better circumstances. Olivia, when did you know? When did you know that you were in a movement? What was the clue?
Honestly, the thing that made me really realize how huge this was when we went to Tallahassee. I was one of the students who got to go up there to speak to lawmakers. And the night we got there, we were greeted at a local high school in Tallahassee. And when we got there, there were about 500 students waiting and a ton of media and cameras and everything. And I realized for the national news, and I realized how huge it was and how well recognized it was everywhere. And that was the moment where I realized that we were really making an impact everywhere.
Clifton, I'm just thinking of you watching this, like the rest of us watching from around the world. Did you have a clue that something unusual was going on here?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here today. My thoughts and prayers go out to the victims, their families, and to the Never Again activists who are standing up right now in Florida and across this country to make sure that gun violence ends. My tweet the other day on Twitter was not a critique of the student protest, but
Clifton, when did you know that this was a movement? Before we get into tweets,
it wasn't a critique of the student protest movement, but acknowledgement that the students there were rising up against gun violence. I noticed that it was a organic movement once I saw that young people were angry, similar to how we were in Ferguson. But we weren't just angry. We started organizing in ways generations haven't seen before, and we began protesting for gun reform, much like the students in Florida are now.
Let me just share with our audience what you're talking about here. Lex for Change is part of this Never Again movement. Have a look here on my laptop. Lex for Change says, much of what I've done and wanted to do was inspired by Black Lives Matter. And then just scrolling up to you saying, thank you. I'm glad you're all standing up for what's right and recognizing the dynamics majority privilege often creates.
Yes.
Malika?
So this definitely has become a movement, even if it didn't just start here, which is what your tweet was referencing, that this is a movement that's been in the works for a while. And it is spreading, though, to places that it might not have seen before. This is Rebecca on Twitter. She says, I'm a senior in college, so the fact that I've been in school since Columbine, which is referencing another major shooting, makes March for Our Lives an extremely important issue to me. And she's referencing a march that is scheduled for March 24th, where students will come to the U.S. Capitol. She says, I got involved through a Facebook group for the Birmingham, Alabama march and volunteered to help get students from my university involved. Being in the state of Alabama, we feel that all eyes are on us when it comes to this issue. We have an amazing group of student leaders organizing for this march, and I'm excited. So that's one person in Alabama. We also got someone who said something very similar, and she's in Seattle. This is what she told the stream.
Really, it's about who gets to be seen as heroes and who gets to be seen as victims and who gets to be seen as worthy of our protection. And the youth in Parkland are being uplifted right now and never again, and that's exactly what they deserve. And yet, when it was black youth and the movement for Black Lives, not only using the same tactics but designing them, they were largely abandoned by society. And we need to interrogate why that is and what happens when it's black youth that's doing the disrupting, because the reality is, without black youth, no real change or progress is possible.
So that was Janaya Khan, and she wrote this piece, Why It Hurts When the World Loves Everyone But Us. And I misspoke there. She's not in Seattle. She is actually in Los Angeles. But Kai, I want to throw that to you. So you see people organizing all across the country, but she wants us to remember this point, which is this movement has been in the works for a while. What do you make of that?
I personally think that this movement, since it's so all-encompassing, this is something a lot of Americans can get behind. A lot of Americans, the American dream is, I want to start a family, get a nice house, and live out the rest of my life, right? And people have done that here in Parkland, and the issue with the Black Lives Matter movement, as far as, the abandonment goes, is that, for a long time, blacks have been, downtrodden and associated with criminality. And here, this is an issue that, like I said, everyone can get behind. It softens the hearts of all, regardless of race.
So, Kai, I'd love to jump in there. I think that you all have lifted up some really important things. And when we think about the long history of young people rising up, particularly young black people rising up in this country in protest against the various ways that they are harmed, criminalized, and experience violence, it has never been the most popular thing. Like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is now seen as this popular character, but when at the height of the movement, he was not actually supported. When they did the Children's March during the Civil Rights Movement, those young people and their parents were heavily criticized. And so what I want us to get away from is this idea that what's happening in this moment is just simply more palatable because it's a broad issue. The movement for Black Lives is actually about all people. It's just about young black folks and black people, period, demanding very clear things, developing leadership, and saying that if we were free, everybody would be free in turn.
So, Olivia, I want to bring you back in here with this tweet because I hear what you were saying, Charlene. So this is Sammy, who says, the youth of America are America's future. Now that we're older, we're getting into adulthood, we can finally have a voice. Long story short, people and innocent children are dying because guns are far too easy to access. And it's being shrugged off by older people in Congress and by the National Rifle Association who don't have experiences like these tragedies. I live about an hour away from Sandy Hook Elementary, and it rocked the whole of New England. It's time to put a stop to all of this, and it's time to raise our voices. And Olivia, I bring this up because after the Sandy Hook shooting, which was at an elementary school, you had a lot of people saying these are little babies. Something has to be done after this shooting. Is that a feeling that you have now?
I feel like it's totally different for us since we're high schoolers, we're educated, and we can speak on this issue, and we have our voices, and we have the platform to use them, especially on social media and on TV and things like that. We have the platform to show our voices, and we have the ability to speak eloquently, and we're educated on the issues, and we can speak for ourselves. We don't have to depend on adults who often fall short because they're refusing to take action themselves and speak for us. It's a student-led movement. We're doing this ourselves, and of course, we're very grateful and we love the support of the administration, the teachers, all adults, and everyone. But this is really a student-led movement, and I think we're showing that.
Olivia, what's going on that we're not seeing? What's the movement part of it? We see the media interviews, we see the walkouts, we see the gatherings. What are we not seeing behind the scenes? Share that with us. And Kai too.
I mean, there's kind of just this unspoken, like aura of just power and this force that is driving us to really want change because we know it needs to happen. And it's like none of us really intended for example, like social media fame or anything like that. It just happened, and now we have this force driving us. And I mean, there's nothing really behind the scenes that isn't being projected to the world because we're trying to use our platforms and our voices to show everything.
I hear that, but what I'm wondering though, Kai, is so you going to school, you're doing your studies, and are you having meetings? Are you having strategy meetings? Do you have advisors coming in? How do you build this movement that started organically from a tragic incident?
Well, when we were marching on Tallahassee, originally that night they assigned us into groups based upon the friends we had that we agreed, in terms of the views that we had on certain topics, right? So basically, at least what I do is we meet rather weekly. We talk about the issues that we'd like to address and, on certain topics. But the reason why this whole movement started in the first place and why we're so passionate about it is because this has directly affected us. I have friends who have lost friends as a result of this. And I know people who were in the hospital, and I prayed for them every single day that they made it out. So to me, this strikes a very personal chord. And this is not something I plan on abandoning anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. Sorry.
When we were in Tallahassee, so we were in the same group, and we were sitting on the floor in a hallway up until really late at night. We were drafting what we were going to say to the lawmakers. We were planning on what our arguments were going to be, and we were thinking on specific, concrete changes that we want to make in the laws, not just we want change. We want to propose our own ideas and stuff. And so we were.
So what did you write down? What were those specific changes that you wrote down?
So we wrote down different ideas for mental health reform and gun reform, including the assault weapons ban, stricter background checks, mental health evaluations. We got into the specifics of those kinds of things, and we proposed it to the lawmakers. And I hope they really listened to our message and heard what we were trying to say.
Charlene?
Yeah, so generally, I'm super excited pretty much anytime young people decide to organize around something that they believe in. I'm curious about, if you all are interested in, making connections or deep connections with many of the Black student-led groups and young and Black youth-led organizations and groups of people who've been on the ground in Baltimore, Chicago, Charlotte, Chicago, just all over the country, and if there are concrete ways that we can maybe even share some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the things that haven't worked and some of the things that have worked well.
So yeah, we understand that Black youth across this country have been protesting for gun reform now for nearly over 4 years now. We understand that police violence and the way that police utilize their guns in Black communities is also a form of gun violence that has to be addressed. We also cannot support and we have to push for gun reform that does not penalize people in ways that increase mass incarceration. We understand that we need urgent gun reform now. We do need to support assault weapons bans and universal background checks, but we also need to make sure that we're not increasing crimes and creating new penalties that will increase mass incarceration and hurt communities of color.
So I heard the question, but I didn't hear. Yeah, Olivia, go ahead, go.
I was just going to say that's another reason why we're so for the prevention instead of the defense against gun violence, because some people seem to think the solution is more guns to defend against for example, the good guy with a gun beats a bad guy with a gun argument. The reason why we have such a problem with that is because, for example, the argument of arming teachers, and that can't work for so many reasons, but one reason is that there's gun violence in all different types of communities. There's gun violence at concerts and clubs and things like that, and you can't have so much security everywhere, especially in schools. And the issue really needs to be tackled by preventing it and restricting guns in the first place, rather than adding more guns until everyone is trying to defend themselves with a gun, because more guns just leads to more gun deaths, accidental deaths, gun violence, and it's really important that there's restrictions on the sale of guns in the first place to prevent against this.
And I think part of the problem for activists on this side of the debate is that not everyone agrees with them or your point of view. This is a tweet we got from Grain of Salt, who says, "We know the left is trying to disarm us because it makes us less powerful and easier to dominate politically. We know it's just a power move and we're not going to stand for it." Kai, when you see tweets like this, would you even consider yourself a member of any party, a member of any political persuasion? Is this about politics for you?
Well, no, we've pushed from the very beginning that this has to be a bipartisan issue. It's not about red or blue. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's strictly about, saving lives. The whole, push for this is that we're trying to secure the safety and the just overall livelihood of our future children. It's not about, the guy who likes guns versus the guy who doesn't. It's not simply about that. There's a bigger purpose, and if what Olivia was saying with regard to arming teachers, we felt that was a much bigger issue than it was being treated as. You know what I mean? Because teachers, we didn't really feel were reliable enough to because like for instance, most of the teachers that we have at our school are elderly, and we're not going to risk our lives or have our lives depend on the elderly to defend us, in which case, because that just doesn't work out for obvious reasons.
So Kai, let me just remind everybody of what President Trump said on the 26th of February. Have a listen.
Now, I know that you have suggested arming our teachers. And
not your teachers. Arming a small portion that are very gun adept, that truly know how to handle. Because I do feel, Governor, it's very important that gun-free zones, you have a gun-free zone, it's like an invitation for these very sick people to go there. I do think that there has to be some form of major retaliation if they're able to enter a school.
So, Olivia, if you just think about impact of what your movement Never Again have done so far. You've had the president having a number of conversations, public conversations, people debating gun violence, gun control. What else is on your list of this is what we've done in 2 weeks?
We spoke to Florida lawmakers. A lot of people have written letters to Congress and things like that. And another comment I want to make about what Trump said is that he said he'd be in support of well-trained teachers having guns, but I think there's still problems with that because no matter how well-trained someone is, you don't know how they'll react in the real situation. It's hectic. There's kids running around. You could accidentally shoot an innocent student. You could mistake the wrong person. The gun could go off accidentally. There's just so many things that could go wrong. And a lot of teachers, not a lot, but some teachers, or for example, the school resource officer we had on campus chose to protect themselves instead of trying to locate the shooter or protect others. And it's just, you don't know how they'll react in the real situation. Like, we were there, we heard the shots, the screams. Some people saw worse things than others. We know that can't possibly be the solution. More guns on campus is not the answer. The only thing that I could see is definitely some more security guards because, our school only had one resource officer for about 3,000 kids. So a ratio of about 1 to 1,000 I think is good. So some more trained officers outside the classrooms, but definitely no guns inside the classrooms because I would feel unsafe coming to school. So would a lot of other students.
So I'm here in Chicago, and so much of what I've heard Olivia share is what I hear from the young people who are fighting to keep their public schools open right now. So I'm really inspired by what y'all are doing in Parkland, and I just want to see, I want to know how we can connect what's happening with the young people fighting to keep their schools open, the young people fighting to get police officers out of their schools, the young people fighting to create safer communities, because safety is not just about the government. The government actually won't create all of the safety that we need.
Right.
And when we talk about the reasons that young white men pick up assault weapons and enter schools and commit mass acts of violence, it's beyond what any one policy can do. I'm in support of us actually like passing policy that's meaningful for people's lives.
Right.
And how are we going to talk about the role of patriarchy, of violence, and how people even develop their ideas around be it white supremacy, patriarchy, or anything. And there's so many things happening across the country. And the last thing I want to say is give yourselves time. You've done so much in 2 weeks. Don't let these older folks or anybody tell you that everything has to be done in a month. Movements take time, and you want to come out on the other side of this a whole person.
So Clifton, let me just pick up on this idea of connecting, because Charlene and Clifton, you're really keen to connect, but I'm just wondering, Kai, do you have the capacity right now, 2 weeks into this brand new movement, to start connecting with other people? Do you feel you're ready for that? Are you already doing that?
I feel like the more people we have, you know, of all cultural denominations, would actually serve to strengthen the movement in the long run, because we cannot just approach this from one socioeconomical angle. You know, we have to have all people in support of all of our issues. Like, movements are founded, in particular the civil rights movement. You know, it was supported by all people.
It looks like we just lost Kai there, and Clifton, I know you want to get in. I want to bring this to you
Absolutely.
Before you do, because this is someone who thinks, yes, you guys can do this. Joseph says, being able to organize for a 17-year-old really is easy. We often forget that it's in this stage of our lives that we're fueled up to show off what we learn in class when we're most gregarious, active, and competitive. It's this stage in our lives when differences are easily suspended to win over a common enemy with all of our energy. And you started this fight in 2014, so I'm guessing you agree with that.
Yeah. So, you know, my mind really goes back to August 2014, when my community was met with an unnecessary militaristic police force, and we chose to resist that force by demonstrating and using our First Amendment rights.
And this is after the death of Michael Brown.
This is after the death of Michael Brown. At the age of 17, I organized Our Destiny STL, coalition of high school students. We engaged in massive walkouts, massive demonstrations.
And you went to Ferguson as well. We've got a picture of you at Ferguson.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We lobbied for legislation, gun reform, because we saw gun reform as reforming the guns of police. You cannot talk about gun reform unless you talk about police reform as well. We also understand that right now we have to build an intersectional movement. This intersectional movement is going to be led by our generation, because our generation is standing up and saying enough is enough. We were radicalized, we were energized and educated by Ferguson. And now we're looking at ways to sort of unify this movement and talk about gun reform and push for gun reform in ways that do not hurt communities of color. And right now, I've reached out to a few activists. We're focused on how can we make sure that...
you were talking about that connection, and you are making that connection. If you go through your Twitter feed, at Clifton Kinney, I can see you talking to the students in Florida and hopefully making those connections really strong.
I appreciate that.
Olivia, I have to say, hashtag dump the NRA is doing really well right now, getting businesses to disconnect with the NRA. Let me just show people what's happened again in 2 weeks. So we're going to show you some of the well-known brands that have opted out of supporting the NRA. So we have Avis, healthcare firm, MetLife, United Airlines. We've got all those discount programs, they've gone away, and the boycott continues. I don't remember another time where people have said, en masse, we're not giving you our money, we're not supporting you. Is that a win? Is that your biggest win so far?
It is a huge win, because it shows that these companies, they're really listening to us. And even if politicians keep giving vague answers, and like some are advocating that they are going to make some changes, but others are just, they're dodging the questions all the time. And it's just that the fact that these big companies are siding with us and they're listening to us, it means so much, because when something affects these politicians' pocketbooks, that can really get them to start caring. So like, for example, I believe yesterday, Dick's Sporting Goods and Walmart.
Yeah,
both,
I saw that. They're changing the age of when you can get a gun at 21. Olivia, half an hour goes so fast. Thank you to Kai and Charlene, Clifton and Olivia for being part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. We continue online. Hashtag AJ Street.